The first thing I noticed was the absolute silence on the radio. Channel 9, our main dispatch frequency, is never quiet. Not at 6 in the morning on a Monday. Not when we have 412 trucks rolling across 26 states, carrying everything from frozen chicken tenders to pharmaceutical-grade insulin that will go bad if the trailer drops below 32 degrees for more than 45 minutes. My name is Sean. I am 55 years old, and for the last 11 years, I have been the Senior Logistics Systems Manager at Oakport, shipping out of Cincinnati, Ohio. That is a fancy title for the guy who makes sure 412 trucks know where they are going, what they are carrying, and how to get there without killing the cargo, the driver, or the company profit margins. When dispatch goes silent, it means one of two things. Either everything is running so perfectly that nobody needs help, which has happened exactly 0 times in my career, or the system is down and nobody can reach anybody. I had a real bad feeling it was the second one. Let me tell you something about freight logistics that most people do not understand. When you order something online and it shows up at your door 2 days later, you think it is magic. It is not magic. It is 1,000 moving pieces held together by software, diesel fuel, and guys like me who have not slept a full night since the turn of the century. The routing system I built at Oakport is not some off-the-shelf solution you buy from a vendor and plug in. It is a living, breathing organism that I have been feeding and patching and rewiring for over a decade. Every truck has a global positioning transponder that talks to our dispatch server every 90 seconds. The system calculates optimal routes based on delivery windows, traffic patterns, weather conditions, fuel prices at every truck stop along the way, and hours of service regulations that the Department of Transportation enforces like they are the 10 Commandments. Miss a delivery window for Continental Grocery by 30 minutes. That is a $15,000 penalty. Let a driver exceed his 14-hour duty clock. That is a $16,000 fine per violation and a mark on our safety record that follows us for 3 years. Keep a trailer of frozen shrimp sitting on a loading dock in August because the routing algorithm sent the replacement truck to the wrong warehouse. That is $180,000 in spoiled product and a client we will never see again. My system handles all of that. It is not pretty. It runs on a combination of custom database scripts, proprietary connections to our clients' warehouse management systems, and about 60,000 lines of code that I have written, rewritten, and patched together like a quilt made by a man who learned to sew in the dark. But it works. It works every single day, 365 days a year, because freight does not take holidays, and neither do I. The trouble started 4 months ago when Oakport got acquired by Pinnacle Capital Alliance, a private equity firm out of New York that buys logistics companies the way some people buy shoes, compulsively, and without really thinking about whether they fit. Pinnacle sent in their operations director, a guy named Julian, to optimize our business. Julian is 31 years old, wears those slim fit suits with no socks and loafers, and says things like leverage our synergies and drive operational alpha without any apparent awareness that those phrases mean absolutely nothing. He has a Master of Business Administration from a prestigious business school, which he mentions within the first 4 minutes of every conversation, and he has never been inside a truck cab, never loaded a 48-foot trailer in one of 100 degrees heat, never had to explain to a driver named Gus why his route just changed for the 3rd time because a bridge in Indiana is flooded. Julian called me into his office on a Wednesday. He had redecorated the space that used to belong to our old vice president of operations, a woman named Brenda, who actually understood trucking and got pushed into early retirement the day Pinnacle took over. Now the office had one of those standing desks, a monitor the size of a movie screen, and a plant that I am pretty sure was fake. "Sean," he said, barely looking up from his laptop. "Big change is coming. We are bringing in a new fleet management platform, Nexus Route. It is artificially intelligent, cloud native, and it is going to transform how we do logistics." I sat down even though there was no chair. I grabbed one from the hallway and dragged it in. "What is Nexus Route?" Julian turned his laptop around to show me a website with a lot of blue gradient backgrounds and stock photos of trucks that were clearly European, because the cabs looked wrong. It is a startup out of Dallas. My buddy Colin runs it. They have built an intelligent routing engine that can replace your entire legacy system. Real-time optimization, predictive analytics, autonomous dispatch, the whole package. His buddy Colin. That was the first red flag. The second was that I had never heard of Nexus Route, and I know every major logistics platform on the market because it is literally my job. How many trucks is their biggest deployment? I asked. Julian scrolled through the website. It says here they have handled fleets of up to 50 vehicles. 50. We run 412. That is like testing a canoe on a pond and then taking it into the Atlantic during hurricane season. It scales, Julian said with the confidence of a man who has never had to make anything scale. Colin assured me, the software learns as it goes, the software learns as it goes. I want you to sit with that sentence for a second. The system that is supposed to route $3 million worth of cargo per day across 26 states is going to learn as it goes. That is like saying the pilot of your cross-country flight is going to figure out how to land while you are in the air. Julian, I said, keeping my voice steady, our routing system handles federal compliance for every state we operate in. Hours of service rules, electronic logging device integration, hazardous materials routing restrictions. We carry Class 3 flammables and Class 8 corrosives that legally cannot travel through certain tunnels, across certain bridges, or within 2 miles of certain water treatment facilities. Does Nexus Route handle hazardous materials routing compliance? Julian stared at me for a second. It handles routing. I am sure hazardous materials are part of that. Those 9 words told me everything I needed to know. This man was about to bet the entire company on a system built by his business school buddy's startup that had never handled a fleet our size, probably had no compliance module, and was going to learn as it goes. But here is the thing. Julian did not want my opinion. He wanted my departure. 3 days later, Human Resources sent me a calendar invite for a meeting titled Organizational Realignment Discussion. I knew what that meant. I had been in this industry long enough to speak fluent corporate euphemism. The meeting was short. Julian, the Human Resources Director Denise, and a 26-year-old kid named Cody, who Julian introduced as our new Director of Logistic Technology. Cody had graduated from some coding boot camp 8 months ago, worked at Colin's startup for 6 months, and was now apparently qualified to replace a guy who had been doing this for 11 years. Cody is going to be managing the migration to Nexus Route, Julian said. We will need you to hand over all system access and documentation by Friday. Today was Tuesday. They wanted me to hand over a decade of institutional knowledge in 3 days. You realize, I said, that our biggest client, Continental Grocery, has a 150-truck dedicated fleet contract with us. Their delivery windows are measured in 15-minute increments. If we miss a window at one of their distribution centers, they do not just fine us. They have the contractual right to terminate and sue for damages. My system has hit 99.2% on-time delivery for Continental Grocery for 7 straight years. The software will handle it, Cody said, not looking up from his phone. It has machine learning models trained on millions of data points. Millions of data points from where? I asked. Cody glanced at Julian like he was not sure he was allowed to answer. Simulated environments, mostly, but the models are extremely robust. Simulated environments. He trained his models on fake data and was about to unleash it on real trucks carrying real cargo worth real money. This was going to be spectacular, and not in a good way. I spent Wednesday and Thursday doing what they asked, documenting everything I could. But here is the reality of complex systems that have evolved over 11 years. You can't write down instinct. You can't document the fact that Continental Grocery's warehouse in Cleveland has a loading dock supervisor named Roy, who always marks trucks as late if they arrive during his lunch break, even if they are on time. So you have to route Cleveland deliveries to arrive before 11:30 or after 1:15. You can't explain in a manual that our driver, Travis, has a medical exemption that limits his driving hours to 10 instead of 11, but the exemption expired and got renewed with different terms last March, and the electronic logging system still shows the old limit. So you have to manually override it every Monday morning, or he gets flagged for a violation he is not committing. Cody shadowed me for those 2 days. He asked questions that revealed he did not understand the basics. "What is a waybill?" he asked at one point. I am not joking. The kid was supposed to run logistics for a $340 million shipping company, and he did not know what a waybill was. That is like hiring a chef who asks what an oven is. Friday came. I packed my coffee mug, the photo of my daughter's wedding, and the stress ball shaped like a truck that my team had given me as a joke 5 years ago. I shook hands with the dispatchers, the dock supervisors, the drivers who happened to be in the yard. Gus grabbed me in a bear hug that nearly cracked my ribs. "You sure about this, Sean? They are going to run this place into the ground without you. Not my circus anymore, Gus. Take care of yourself." I drove home listening to classic rock and trying to figure out if what I was feeling was anger, relief, or the particular numbness that comes from watching someone make a catastrophic mistake and being powerless to stop it. Probably all three. The first call came Saturday morning. My buddy Paul in dispatch texted me. Nexus route went live at midnight. System just routed a truck carrying restricted chemicals through the Cumberland Gap Tunnel. Hazardous materials class 9, restricted route. Driver caught it and refused. Cody told him to just go around. Just go around. Going around means adding 6 hours in a mountain pass. The chemicals had a 4-hour delivery window. By Monday morning, my phone looked like a newsreel of a slow-motion apocalypse. The routing system had been live for 60 hours, and it had already created what I can only describe as logistical anarchy. First, it routed 14 trucks carrying Continental Groceries frozen food to their Columbus distribution center. Their Columbus facility handles dry goods. Their frozen facility is in Dayton, 30 miles west. 14 truckloads of frozen food sat on a loading dock with no refrigerated bay for 3 hours. The dock workers in Columbus were completely confused and had no place to put the refrigerated shipments. By the time someone in our dispatch office figured out the error and redirected the drivers, the summer heat had done its job. The internal temperature of the trailers had risen past the food safety threshold. $2,100,000 in prime frozen product was completely destroyed. The local warehouse managers were furious, and they immediately reported the incident to their corporate office. The driver, who had been routed through the Cumberland Gap Tunnel carrying hazardous materials class 8 corrosives, specifically hydrochloric acid, was a veteran driver named Bo. Bo called the dispatch desk at 2 in the morning, his voice crackling over the cellular connection. He told Cody that the system was ordering him to go straight through the tunnel. Cody, sitting in his apartment with his laptop, looked at his dashboard and saw that the tunnel was the absolute shortest route by 30 miles. He told Bo to ignore the warnings and just go. Bo refused, pointing out that carrying Class 8 corrosives through that tunnel carries a heavy federal fine and could cost him his commercial driver's license. When Cody kept pushing, Bo ended the call and pulled his rig over at a truck stop, refusing to budge until he got a legal route. Then the system decided to optimize the fleet by reassigning drivers mid-route. Drivers who were headed to Phoenix got redirected to Portland. Drivers scheduled for local runs in Cincinnati got sent to Florida. The system did not account for hours of service regulations. It was telling guys who had already been driving for 10 hours to take on 12-hour runs. When the drivers refused because, federal law, the system flagged them as non-compliant and locked them out of the dispatch portal. The drivers were stranded at various truck stops in Ohio and Indiana, unable to access their routing details or message their dispatchers. The dispatch floor was in complete chaos, as dispatchers tried to use whiteboards to track the trucks. But with no GPS tracking data, they were flying completely blind. By Tuesday, we had 167 trucks sitting idle because their drivers were locked out of the system, and Cody could not figure out how to override it. He called Colin in Dallas. Colin said it was a known issue, and they were working on a patch. A known issue in a system that was manning a $340 million shipping operation. That is like finding out the brakes on your car are a known issue after you have already started down the mountain. The Continental Grocery disaster got worse. Their vice president of supply chain, a terrifying woman named Diane, called Julian directly. I know this because Paul forwarded me the internal email Julian sent afterward. which was essentially 4 paragraphs of panic, disguised as corporate communication. Continental Grocery was threatening to invoke the termination clause in our contract, a $50 million dedicated fleet agreement that represented roughly 15% of Oakport's annual revenue. Wednesday brought the Department of Transportation into the picture. Turns out, Nexus Route's compliance module had been generating fraudulent electronic logging device records. Not intentionally, the system just did not understand how logging data worked. So it was backfilling gaps with fabricated hours to show routes as compliant. When the Department of Transportation pulled our records for a random audit on 3 trucks in Ohio, they found driving logs that showed the same driver in 2 different states at the same time. That is not a glitch, that is federal fraud, and it carries penalties of up to $16,000 per violation per day. The Department of Transportation opened a formal investigation. The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration flagged our carrier rating for review. Insurance companies started calling, asking questions about our system migration and whether it affected our risk profile. When your insurance company starts asking questions, it means they are looking for a reason to raise your premiums or drop you entirely. Thursday morning, I was sitting on my back porch drinking coffee and watching the squirrels fight over the bird feeder when my phone rang. It was Julian, and he sounded like a man who just realized the building he was standing in was on fire. Sean, his voice was hoarse. "I need you to come in." "Morning, Julian," I said. "I saw on the news that Continental Grocery pulled their fleet contract. That has got to sting. Listen, I know this transition there were unforeseen." "Julian," he took a breath. It did not seem to help. "The Department of Transportation is threatening to shut down our interstate operations. Continental Grocery is gone. Other accounts are threatening to leave. We have got 108 drivers who have not been paid because the new system cannot process payroll exports correctly. The fuel card integration is down, so guys are paying for diesel out of pocket. I have got a driver in Oklahoma who has been sitting at a truck stop for 36 hours because the system will not generate his dispatch order, and Cody cannot figure out why." "Sounds like quite a week," I said. "Will you come back?" Julian asked, consulting basis. "Whatever you want." The phone rang repeatedly until I picked it up. Julian did not even say hello. He just started speaking, his voice cracking with a panic that was a far cry from his usual smug tone. "Sean, you have to help us," he pleaded. "We are facing a complete disaster here. The Department of Transportation investigators are in the office right now, and they are threatening to pull our operating authority. If they issue an out-of-service order, not a single one of our trucks can cross state lines. That would kill our business by tomorrow night." I took a slow sip of my coffee, enjoying the warm breeze on my porch before answering. I told him that I had warned him about this very scenario, but he had chosen to listen to a coding bootcamp graduate and a startup founder instead of a seasoned professional. He begged me to name my price, saying that Pinnacle Capital Alliance would pay whatever it took to get the trucks moving again. I had been thinking about this moment since Friday. Part of me wanted to say no. Part of me wanted to let them burn. But then I thought about the drivers. Gus with his daughter's college tuition coming due. Travis who sends money to his mother in a nursing home every week. 412 drivers who did not create this mess, but were paying for it. $85,000, I said. Retainer, non-refundable, wired to my account before I walked through the door. Plus a new 2-year contract at double my previous salary with a clause that says no system changes can be made without my written approval. "Done," Julian said. "I am not finished," I added. "Cody goes today. I do not care where. Send him back to Colin's startup. Send him to business school. Send him to the moon. I do not work with people who do not know what a waybill is. And I want a written letter from Pinnacle Capital Alliance's managing partner acknowledging that this disaster was caused by their decision to replace a functioning system with an untested platform. More importantly, Julian, we need to talk about corporate governance. Your decision to bypass our standard procurement procedures and award a critical system contract to your close business school friend, Colin, without any competitive bidding or technical vetting, is a clear breach of fiduciary duty under corporate law. You violated your duty of loyalty and your duty of care to Oakport Shipping and its parent company. You used your position to hand a major contract to a friend whose startup was completely unequipped to handle a fleet of our size. This is not just poor judgment, Julian. It is a legal liability that could make you personally responsible and expose Pinnacle Capital Alliance to shareholder lawsuits for wasting corporate assets. I explained to him that corporate officers owe three primary fiduciary duties to the corporation and its shareholders: the duty of care, the duty of loyalty, and the duty of good faith. By bypassing our standard bidding guidelines to award a major software migration contract to his close friend Colin, Julian had acted in his own self-interest rather than the interest of Oakport Shipping. Under corporate law, this constitutes a flagrant breach of the duty of loyalty, which is not protected by the business judgment rule. If the parent company's shareholders found out that his personal relationship with Colin was the sole reason we replaced a working system with a faulty platform, they could sue him and the board for waste of corporate assets. The board would throw him under the bus in a second to protect themselves from a derivative lawsuit. I know for a fact that the parent company's legal counsel will be extremely interested to know how Colin's startup got selected. If I do not get that signed letter and my contract by tomorrow morning, my first call is to the parent company's general counsel, and my second call is to the federal investigators. I will hand them the entire audit trail, showing how you and Cody bypassed the vetting process and then tried to cover up the system compliance failures by letting Colin's software generate fraudulent logging reports. Long silence on the line. You are asking me to admit we screwed up in writing, and you are accusing me of a breach of duty. Julian, I said, you have got 108 unpaid drivers, a federal fraud investigation, and your largest client just walked out the door. The board is going to find out anyway. The only question is whether you want me to save the company before they fire you. Julian agreed to everything in under 30 seconds. The fear of a federal investigation and a shareholder derivative suit for breach of fiduciary duty has a way of clarifying a man's priorities. I showed up Friday morning at 6 in the morning. The parking lot was half empty because a third of our drivers had gone home or were still stranded at truck stops across the country. Paul met me at the door with a coffee and a look of pure relief. I have never been so happy to see anybody in my life, he said. The dispatch floor looked like a war zone. Phones ringing nonstop, whiteboards covered in scribbled routes, and Cody's abandoned desk with 3 monitors all showing the Nexus route dashboard, which was displaying a cheerful message that said optimizing your fleet above a spinning loading icon that had apparently been spinning for 19 hours straight. First thing I did was kill Nexus Route. I disconnected the application programming interface, revoked the access tokens, and shut down the cloud integration. Cody had never bothered to disconnect my legacy system because he did not know where it lived. It was still there on the same servers untouched, like a faithful dog waiting for its owner to come home. I brought my system back online in 40 minutes. The routing engine spun up, recognized that 412 trucks were scattered across the country in positions that made no logical sense, and started calculating recovery routes. I spent the next 14 hours at my desk manually reassigning every truck, checking every driver's hours of service status against reality instead of the fabricated logs Nexus Route had created, and rebuilding the delivery schedules. I needed to prove our system was functional before other major accounts pulled the plug too. By Saturday afternoon, every driver had a valid dispatch order. Fuel cards were reactivated. Payroll exports were corrected and sent to accounting for emergency processing. I personally called the Department of Transportation investigator, a no-nonsense woman named Agent Gomez, and walked her through exactly what had happened. I showed her the fabricated logging records, demonstrated that they were generated by a third-party startup system that had since been disconnected, and provided clean logs from my original system proving our actual compliance history. She was not happy, but she was fair. The investigation would continue, but she agreed to hold off on any immediate shutdown order. Our remaining accounts stayed. The Department of Transportation downgraded their investigation from an imminent hazard to a standard compliance review. The 108 drivers got their back pay by the following Wednesday with a bonus for the inconvenience. The Continental grocery contract was gone, and that one hurt, but the company survived. 3 weeks later, Julian was reassigned to another Pinnacle portfolio company. Rumor has it, he is optimizing a chain of car washes in New Jersey. Cody went back to Dallas. I heard Colin's startup lost 2 other clients after our disaster made the rounds in the industry. Turns out when a logistics platform causes a federal fraud investigation, word travels fast. I got my corner office. Nothing fancy, same building, same floor, but it has a window that overlooks the truck yard. And every morning I can watch the rigs roll out, lights on, diesel rumbling, headed in the right direction because the system that tells them where to go was built by someone who understands that behind every data point is a real person with a family and a mortgage and a kid who needs braces. Paul stopped by my office last Friday with a gift. It was a stress ball shaped like a truck, just like my old one, but this one had writing on it. It said, "Route Master, do not replace." I put it on my desk next to the coffee mug and leaned back in my chair. Through the window, I could see Gus's rig pulling out of the yard, right on schedule. He would make Roy's loading dock well before lunch because the system knew to get him there by 11:15. Some things you cannot teach an algorithm. Some things you can only learn by being there, day after day, solving problems that do not exist in simulated environments, building workarounds for a world that does not run on clean data and perfect conditions. You can throw all the AI and machine learning and cloud-native buzzwords you want at a problem, but at the end of the day, somebody has to know that Roy takes his lunch at 11:03, and Travis's exemption changed last March, and the Cumberland Gap Tunnel is closed to hazardous materials. Somebody has to care enough to remember. I poured some coffee and raised the mug toward the window where the trucks were rolling. Here is to the guys who keep it moving, and here is to the people smart enough not to fix what is not broken. That makes getting up early completely worth it.